Hey guys, Argent here. So I haven't really said much about the Canadian election. Now there's a number of reasons for that. First and foremost being I don't think it matters. I think the election is completely irrelevant. I don't think it really matters who wins. I guess it mattered enough because I voted in the early polls for Mr. Harper. But overall, it's just really a symbol of how fucking cynical Canadian politics are, and just the kind of thing that really kind of made me essentially a political nihilist. The reason I grew to hate democracy so much, and the reason why I'm just blanket opposed it and so vehemently opposed to it, is the experience of living in Canada. Canada, for those of you who don't know, probably is even more so than a country like Britain or America, has virtually no difference between the various political parties. There is no major ideological difference between any of the political parties. Even the minor policy differences are not that important. Um, what it ultimately comes down to, if you look at the election platforms, some parties want to raise taxes 1 to 2%, and some parties want to lower taxes 1 to 2%. Some parties want to increase immigration by 10%, some want to increase it by 20%. Ultimately, it's very minor around the edges of degrees. None of the parties actually have any ideological differences. None of the parties actually believe different things. If you were to examine their worldview and their philosophy, I don't think you would find anything different. I think you would find minor disagreements about how big government should be, but even then, I don't think those are that important. Um, the Conservative Party is not particularly economically liberal or economically free market. They haven't particularly tried to bring in any real changes in that direction. I'm not particularly free market myself, but if they were trying to do some libertarian economics, maybe like a flat tax or like vouchers for healthcare or vouchers for schools, I know that's a provincial responsibility, but just something kind of creative and interesting, I would have more respect for them. But upon taking office, they did virtually nothing. Um, they've done a couple minor things. I think they got rid of some of the hate crimes legislation. They didn't really reform the Senate. They mildly cut taxes. They massively increased the debt. They ran deficits until this year. Um, they didn't really do much for the economy. I think they made some minor cuts and they mildly lowered taxes. But they had, like, you have to understand the context of the conservatives and how much just fear mongering there was, and just how much they fucking promised. And this is kind of going to be kind of a rambling, long about way of describing why I've become basically a political nihilist who despises democracy and just hates it with every fiber of my being. Um, After the Conservative Party of Brian Mulroney collapsed, now Brian Mulroney was no one to write home about. He was a socially liberal he was a neoliberal. There was nothing particularly conservative about him, nothing particularly right winged about him. If anything, in a lot of respects, he was to the left of the government that succeeded him, and the government that succeeded him legalized gay marriage. So that says something about Brian Mulroney. So his party collapsed, and in Western Canada, we got the Reform Party. Now, the Reform Party, which Stephen Harper used to be the leader of, well, it became the Alliance Party and then it became the Conservative Party, had as part of its platform opposition to mass immigration, multiculturalism, and social conservatism, including opposition to gay marriage. Did the Conservatives, when they finally came to power after promising this shit for 2 decades, do anything? No. They didn't overturn gay marriage. They had some stupid free vote on it, but they didn't really whip it. They didn't do anything about the fact that like post-birth abortion is legal in Canada. They didn't enact any kind of socially conservative legislation. They didn't try to change the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They didn't restrict immigration. They didn't really liberalize gun laws. They didn't bring back. I think they threw out a gun registry which wasn't functional anyways, so who even cares? They didn't change self-defense laws really. Basically, they passed a bunch of fairly draconian crime bills and increased government surveillance, and that's about it. They didn't deliver on any of their economic, social, and international promises that they had made over the previous 15 years. When Stephen Harper came to power, there is this hysteria in the media about him. They call him a fascist. They call him an authoritarian. People call him a right wing nationalist. They call him leading a junta. They call him a racist. As someone who would support all that stuff, as someone who would like a nationalistic Christian junta to run Canada as opposed to its current government, I don't know what these people are talking about. I wish we had Franco or Salazar running Canada. But we don't have that. We have Stephen Harper, who's like mildly Christian. Apparently, he's the member of some evangelical group, but he supports gay marriage, abortion, social liberalism. So I don't really get it. Does it is the fact that he theoretically believes in God really that offensive to the general population? Is the fact that he occasionally, a couple times a year, talks about his faith during national holidays, is that really that offensive? And this just shows just how fucking fake the whole thing is. I'm sorry if I'm getting angry here, but you don't understand what it's like. Like, if you live in Canada, you have to constantly endure the fucking media going on and on and on and on about how radical Stephen Harper is. And no one can give any examples of it. No one can explain why he's not radical economically. He's like a economic and social liberal. There's nothing socially conservative about him. There's nothing really significantly economically conservative about him. In the American sense. He's not a libertarian. He's not a conservative. He's like a classical liberal. And even then, he doesn't really believe in classical liberal economics, so he's just a liberal. He's just slightly less radical than the other guys. But there is no fundamental difference between him and the other guys. I guess he's a bit like a neocon in some respects because he's willing to use he believes in using military force to spread liberal values. So I guess he's less of a pussy than the other liberals running. But when it comes down to it, he's basically a social liberal with teeth, which in a lot of respects makes him more dangerous than the kind of the pussified social liberals. But no, there's a hysteria. In this election, they're calling him a racist. I wish he was a racist. I wish he was a Canadian nationalist. I wish he'd stand up for the people who built this country, but he won't. He's just another globalist sellout. There's nothing racist about him. There's nothing nationalistic about him. This is how fucking pathetic Canadian politics are. That he's being called a racist because he feels that people should have to fucking show their faces when they're voting. And this is racism. Well, I wouldn't care if he was a racist, but because racism is basically just a natural preference for your own people, and it's basically how every society on Earth was run before, like, the 1960s. And I don't just mean white societies. You think China was like this multiracial society? No. China calls non-Chinese people foreign devils. The Japanese call people non-Japanese people gaijin. The Jews call non-Jews goyim or Gentiles. This was just kind of like a natural thing throughout most of human history. But no, it's not a Islam isn't a race. It's a religion and political ideology and social system. In my view, a totalitarian social system, but it's not a race. Also, most of and this is how fucking stupid the left is. Most Muslims are Caucasians. They're the same race as Stephen Harper. If they're like from the Middle East or Pakistan, they're Caucasians. They may be brown Caucasians, but they're not a separate race. If you look at a genetic chart, they're clearly Caucasians. They aren't even like the Iranians aren't even that genetically far away. Lebanese and Levantine people like from Syria basically just they are almost identical to Europeans genetically, and they just look Mediterranean. A lot of them are like Greeks and Armenians and stuff. So it's not race, it's bullshit. And that's the issue. That's the only issue really that's come up. I remember I was doing a political test, and there's no social issues because that's irrelevant to Canada. There was no social issues on the list. It was all just minor economic issues and bullshit like that. So we have the Conservative Party, which is neither conservative socially nor economically. We have the NDP, which is a socialist party that is indistinguishable from the other two parties, which is theoretically a workers' party but is run by white upper middle class professorial swipples. We have a Liberal Party, which is run by upper middle class white swipples, and a Conservative Party, which is run by upper middle class white swipples. Swipple, for those of you who don't know, stands for stuff white people like, and it's basically a reference to that fucking that blog, and it's what like upper middle class white people who go to university, vote liberal, and live in gated communities believe in. Shit like organic food and like global warming, and like they have this like urge to save people without urgency, and they support multiculturalism but they don't want to live in it. So we have these fucking parties, and they're all identical. And I can't. I've tried. I can't determine a difference between them. Only some are more radically left wing than others. But people are fucking hysterical about Stephen Harper, and they're so fucking arrogant about it, and they're so fucking smug about it, and they attack you, and they call you names if you vote for him or whatever, and it's such fucking, it's just partisanship. It's there's nothing ideological about it. If these people were hardcore communists, and they were saying, well, Stephen Harper believes in capitalism and I don't, and they hated him and the people who support him for that, I would respect that. If these people were radical Muslims and they said, well, he doesn't believe in Sharia, so we hate him, I respect that too. But these people don't hate him for ideological reasons. They don't hate him for any real reason. They just hate him for the most crude and crass nihilistic partisanship possible. And that is what Canada is. It is a politically and morally and socially nihilistic society. They're like, all the decisions have been made. There's no point in even holding elections anymore. The Overton window is so small. The idea of democracy and the idea that any form of democracy exists in Canada is nothing but like, it's an insult. It's a joke. And that's more or less just the way this country is run. So we have that at a federal level. On a provincial level, it's even worse. Because last election, the Conservative Party was widely criticized for not being more similar to the Liberals. The former head of the Conservative Party of Ontario, John Tory, spent the whole campaign accusing the Conservative Party of not being more like the Liberals. He said, the problem we have at the moment, and this is a direct quote, is that the current leader, Tim Hudak, is not running on the same platform as the Premier. I'm not making this up. He said he needs to run the same platform as her, but say he can do it more competently. Well, that's fucking nihilistic. I'm sorry. It's what's the point of having two parties if it's just like gonna change the faces around? Why are these people running for office if they don't have any disagreements with each other? It's just nihilism. Like but what do I mean by nihilism? It's solely power for its own sake. It's solely they want power so they can loot the government and punish people who didn't vote for them and give the money to the people who did vote for them. That's all democratic politics is. There's no ideology, there's no difference of opinion, there's no vision for society, there's no public service. It's just about gaining power and not doing anything with it. It's so depressing. It's so just irrelevant and petty, and these people are fucking obsessed with it. They salivate to it. They jerk off to it. They're like, oh, Justin Trudeau, oh, Stephen Harper, oh, Stephen Harper's the worst. But it's bullshit. It's like cheering for a sports team. It's like there's nothing ideological about it, but people get worked up about it. And I get it's fun to play around. It's fun to cheer for a sports team. It's fun to hate the other sports team. But at the end of the day, you have to realize it's not a moral issue. Whether you like one sports team or another, it's not of a moral or social or ideological standpoint. And that's fine for sports, but for politics, if we're going to have a democracy, I'd like to have choices, but there are no choices. We have 4 or 5 parties, or however the fuck many it is, that are basically the same. And this is what happened in Toronto when Rob Ford got elected. Now, he's a social liberal, but the second he was elected, basically the left set out, and he's pretty left-wing in my view at least, to remove him from office, and they did remove him from office. They hounded him, they spied on him, illegally I might add, for years until they found some shit on him. And then they tried to impeach him, I think, over like photocopying some stuff for the underprivileged football team he coaches. Um, and just they were just so they just accused him of everything under the sun. They accused him of hiring mob guys to kill people. They accused him of like being a pedophile. They accused him of just all the shit possible. And that's just how Canada works. None of them actually really disagreed with anything he did. It's just partisanship. It's just that their guy wasn't in power, so they couldn't loot Toronto and they couldn't punish the people they don't like. And that's all democratic politics is. And that's why this election doesn't fucking matter. And that's why in general elections in the West don't matter. Because in most countries, not all, but most, there is no choice. You just have two parties that are the same, and it's just over who gets to be in power and who gets to loot the state. This is Argent Templar signing out.